My name is Alex Holle. I grew up in a small town called Cedar Grove, which is about 45 minutes north of here in Sheboygan County. I was originally baptized in the Dutch Reformed Protestant tradition, and that's always how I identified my faith, even when I went off to college and I studied theology. For the last 5 years, as far as work goes, I've been serving as a missionary for an interdenominational Christian mission organization called InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. So my journey to the Catholic Church was probably a little windy and it took a long time. I would say it started when I started dating my now wife, who grew up Catholic. Her name is Tammy. And when we first started dating, I was 18 years old, and it wasn't really a big deal. I think we talked about it a little bit, but it wasn't really a big issue for us, with me being Protestant and her being Catholic. But it became more of a conversation point the more serious we got in our relationship. And eventually, after about 5 or 6 years, when we were planning to get married, we made a series of agreements and compromises to make it work in our faith. So, for example, we ended up getting married in the Catholic Church, but we also decided that each Sunday we were going to go to 2 different churches every week, a Protestant church and a Catholic church, and we would both go along to both of them. And that lasted for about 2 years or so, and it sort of got a lot to manage, a little bit tiring, kind of hard to juggle all of that. And so it was at that point that I started to more seriously consider joining the Catholic Church. Up until that point, I had read a lot of Catholic teaching. In my college, we read from a variety of perspectives, and so I took classes on church history and other topics in theology. And my wife also went to Notre Dame, and so she studied theology there. And so I had done a lot of reading and knew a lot of teaching, but it was more intellectual, I would say, and more to understand my wife and her faith better. Through that whole time, I also had gone to Mass probably hundreds of times, and when I went, I participated in some parts, and other parts it felt more like I was kind of this passive observer, maybe. And I think that's because for a lot of Protestants like me, there's a lot of really good and beautiful things that we see in the Catholic Church, but there's also things that can be a barrier for us to fully enter in. And you might guess what some of those things are for Protestants. And so at that point, when I was starting to intentionally more think about the Catholic Church, I was more open to learning more than just kind of intellectually. So over time, I started to maybe have some more dissonance with some of the things that I was taught growing up and in school as a Protestant. A lot of dissonance around the way that different Protestants would have disagreements about the Bible and cause a lot of divisions, and seeing just how it ended up being just like one person's interpretation versus another person's interpretation, and that's why there was so many different churches. And I started to be a little bit more open up to the authority piece of the Catholic Church. I think before then it was hard for me to accept how there is sort of like an authoritative church to interpret the Bible and what is true. And I chafed at that a little bit initially, but over time I saw that I think that's how God really wanted the church to be, that God didn't want the church to be so divided over different ways to interpret the Bible. And once I started to understand that authority piece, I began to open up to not just learning, but really wanting to believe in what the Catholic Church teaches. And from there, it just kind of, things started to fall into place. I grew up in a Protestant tradition that did have a pretty high reverence for the sacraments. But even though I believed that communion was very important and my church taught that, I felt like it wasn't very universal to the rest of the people in church, even some of the people who would be like the communion servers. And so when I received Eucharist for the first time, I felt like it was like the first time that I received it and in a community with how serious and important it really is. One thing that I am excited about now that I am Catholic is I feel like I have joined the church that I'm going to be a part of for the whole rest of my life. Even though growing up I had really only ever been to one church, my family never moved around. Since I went off to college and in the years since then, I did move and I joined a lot of different churches, and it always felt temporary. I always knew that I was going to move somewhere else, and so it was hard for me to fully invest. But now I know that wherever God takes us, that we're going to be a part of the same church. And even if it might be a different parish, it's easier to invest fully into the community because it is the same church. I'm a person that really enjoys learning, so one thing that I have been doing a lot in the past couple of months is reading a lot of books and having a lot of really good discussions with friends and my wife about Catholic teaching. And so I think that learning more about the faith has drawn me to pray in new ways and to appreciate God and His community, and that's really been encouraging to my faith. Most mornings when I do have prayer time, I pray in, I call it the ACTS method. It's fairly popular. That stands for Adoration, Confession, Thanksgiving, and Supplication. And that's been a way that I've prayed since probably high school, that I think it has really shaped like needing to pray through all of the different ways to God, that I could easily focus more on the like supplication, which is the asking God for things, and all of that's good and fine, and God wants us to do that. But I think if left to my own devices, I probably would forget about the adoration or even confession of sins, or remembering to be thankful and have gratitude in prayer. And so that's a way that I typically try to structure my prayers most days.